walking for many hours, that Jesus arrived to a well, and a woman was there at that point in time. We read in verse 3, he left Judea and departed again to Galilee, but he needed to go through Samaria. So he came to a city of Samaria, which is called Sychar, near the plot of ground that Jacob gave to his son Joseph. Now Jacob's well was there. Jesus, therefore, being weary from his journey, sat thus by the well. It was about a 6 hour. So beginning with the first hour, as the sun comes up, the 6 hour is what we will call noontime. It was very hot at that part of the world. And this woman who goes to the well in the middle of the day when no other ladies will be around, because she had a situation in her personal life that she felt ashamed of coming at a time where the rest of the ladies, either early in the morning or toward the end of the day, will come. That was also a time for socialization, to socialize, to engage with one another, and to talk about things that were happening with their children and how things were going with them, with their marriages, and how to make things right with your family members, that you may have some situations at odds. It was also a time for gossip when that type of situation happened. But this woman avoided that scenario because she knows that if she will show up at that time, most likely they will be talking about her. But Jesus sought that woman, regardless of her condition. And through a one-on-one conversation, one-on-one talk, this lady comes to recognize that the man that she's talking to is someone special. And in verse 19, the woman said to him, "Sir, I perceive that you are a prophet." And as Jesus continued talking to her, Jesus revealed to her that he is the long-awaited Messiah. And in verse 24, Jesus said, "God is a spirit, and those who worship him must worship in spirit and in truth." And notice also in verse 23, at the end, there is a phrase there that the Father is seeking such to worship, those who worship in spirit and in truth. And the woman, verse 25, said to him, "I know that the Messiah is coming, who is called Christ, the Anointed One. When he comes, he will tell us all things." Jesus said to her, "I who speak to you am he." Just as plainly as you can understand it, Jesus conveyed to this woman in this situation, under these circumstances, that he is the long-awaited Messiah. And Jesus saw that woman, and the Bible tells us that God is seeking diligently those who wants to worship him in spirit and in truth. Now, let us go to John chapter 3, where we see my second presentation as a way of condensing or making a summary. This time, excuse me, this time, Jesus is not seeking someone like the Samaritan woman. This is a situation where someone is seeking Jesus. But Jesus finds that opportunity for teaching this leader of Israel, this rabbi, or this teacher. And we find in verse 1, there was a man of the Pharisees named Nicodemus, a ruler of the Jews. This man came to Jesus by night and said to him, "Rabbi, we know that you are a teacher, come from God, for no one can do these signs that you do unless God is with him." Remember that at first the woman was wanting to avoid the other ladies at the end of the day because she was afraid they would be talking bad about her. In this case, the Bible says that this Pharisee comes to Jesus by night. Why? Because he doesn't want to come in the middle of the day or any time during the day, because he knows that as a leader of Israel, talking to Jesus, who is a troublemaker, and Jesus, who is considered one that is rocking the boat, he doesn't want to be considered one of those that his reputation, his prestige will be affected. As a matter of fact, in the Gospel of John, and we know that this story took place because John was not there. This was a one-on-one conversation that happened between Nicodemus and Jesus. And Nicodemus at some point taught this story to John, who in his Gospel, his rendition of the good news, he mentions that this conversation happened by night. That is repeated again in John chapter 7, verse 50, when we read that Nicodemus, he who came to Jesus by night, being one of them, said to them. So Nicodemus is mentioned again, and at the end of the Gospel of John, in chapter 19, verse 39, we are told that, chapter 19, verse 39, we are told that Nicodemus appears again. And Nicodemus, verse 39 of chapter 19, who at first came to Jesus by night, also came bringing a mixture of myrrh and aloes, about 100 pounds. So we have this Pharisee, of this man of good reputation among his people, coming at night because he doesn't want to be seen with Jesus during the day. And that might be our situation sometimes, that we are afraid to be seen, that we are walking, and that our life is changing, and that we are very close friends with Jesus. And Jesus then goes to teach these men of Israel, and he even gives some gentle rebuke to these men that he's talking to him. And in verse 10, Jesus said to Nicodemus, "Are you the teacher of Israel and do not know these things? Most assuredly, I say to you, we speak what we know and testify what we have seen, and you do not receive our witness." So he continued talking to Jesus, and Jesus revealed to Nicodemus that he is the long-expected Messiah, and that he will see it when he will be rise up. And he brings a reference to Moses lifting in verse 14, as Moses lifted up the serpent in the wilderness, even so must the Son of Man be lifted up, that whoever believes in him should not perish, but have everlasting life. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whoever believes in him should not perish, but have everlasting life. Jesus revealed to Nicodemus, taught to Nicodemus, and as a matter of fact, this conversation between Jesus and Nicodemus is considered the simplest but the most comprehensive presentation of Jesus regarding how a person can be saved. Just through that simple conversation. Now we come to the Gospel of John chapter 9, where we have the Bible reading today. And in John chapter 9, we see a unique situation here. Many times Jesus healed people who came to ask Jesus to heal them. But in this case, Jesus brings healing to someone who not even asking to be healed. Jesus is so abundant in love and care to see the conditions of people that in this particular case, Jesus goes ahead and brings healing to a man that, according to the story, the narrative, he was blind from birth, verse 1. Verse 2, And his disciple asked him, saying, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? Jesus answered, neither this man nor his parents sinned, but that the works of God should be revealed in him. It was a common understanding back at that point in time that if you were rich, you were healthy, you were happy, you were healthy, that you were under God's blessing because you were a faithful follower of God. On the other hand, they also believed that if you were miserable, you were poor, and you were like Lazarus, in that case, the story of the rich man and Lazarus, if you were in such of a condition, and it's because you have been suffering all of that because you have been bad. Someone might say today, he had a bad karma. We don't believe in that thing about karma, but there is one aspect that may get close to that understanding of Hinduism, and that is that we believe the law of the harvest. What we plant is what we sow. If we plant love and kindness and understanding, we are going to receive, in most cases, the same in return. But if we plant bad things, suspicion, hatred, and rumors, then that also we are going to harvest toward ourselves. But people will refer in today's because of the new age. If this person is not doing well and progressing or not prospering, that's the word I was looking for, prospering, because that person had a bad karma. And in Hinduism, you better not interfere, because if you try to help someone that is having a miserable life, then the bad karma will fall upon you and you are going to be in trouble. That's how the Hindus believe. And that is why the ministry of Mother Teresa of Calcutta was so special. Because when Hindus people, those that believe in Hinduism, would refuse to help those that were considered disposable people of society, this old nun will come and minister to them and help them to die with dignity, with the dignity of a human being. And so, my dear friends, that is the love of God working through this lady. And so, I want to say that Jesus says there are some things that we cannot explain, nor the young men, nor this man, nor the parents have sinned. Some things happen because we live in a world with sin. But the works of God should be revealing him. Verse 3. I must work the works of him who sent me while it is day. The night is coming when no one can work. As long as I am in the world, I am the light of the world. And Jesus is speaking in a spiritual sense. But to make it even more real, he goes on to make it in a literal way to help these men who from birth only have seen darkness. And now Jesus is helping him to see the light of day. And we go then in verse 6. And when he has said these things, he spat on the ground and made clay with the saliva. And he anointed the eyes of the blind man with the clay. And he said to him, go wash in the pool of Siloam, which is translated sent. So he went and washed and came back seeing. Therefore the neighbors and those who previously had seen that he was blind said, is not this he who sat and begged? Basically, this man was in an active position, just sitting in that place, sitting and begging. But when Jesus comes into the life of an individual, you cannot remain sitting. You cannot remain the same place, inactive. You then turn to be in active labor, working for the Master, as you are going to see in the progression of this narrative. Verse 8, Verse 9, some said, this is he. Others said, he is like him. He said, I am he. Therefore they said to him, how were your eyes open? He answered and said, a man called Jesus made clay and anointed my eyes and said to me, go to the pool of Siloam and wash. So I went and washed and I received sight. That was the only thing that this man could witness about Jesus. He's not going into the prophecies of Daniel. He's not going into the prophecies of Isaiah. He's just witnessing what Jesus had done in his life. We don't need to know and explain everything. And we should not be afraid of witnessing for Christ, because he only expects to express and to share what has been our own personal experience with him. And that's all that he could say. They said to him, where is he? And I said, I don't know. And that might be the same answer that they might ask him to some of us, that we might be asked to some of us. And what do you think about the secret rapture? You might say, I don't know. Or you might say, well, I will have to study and read about it. Just bringing randomly a rhetorical question. Verse 13, they brought him who formerly was blind to the Pharisees. Now it was a Sabbath when Jesus made the clay and opened his eyes. Jesus now is teaching. Beside now helping this man, now he is teaching. He mingled with the people. He now is teaching to the leaders of Israel the distortion that they had about the Sabbath and how the Sabbath was not being kept, because the Sabbath was done for our own benefits, to be able to see. And then the Bible goes on to say, therefore, some of the Pharisees said, this man is not from God because he does not keep the Sabbath. That's what they thought, but that's not what God thought about it. Others said, how can a man who is a sinner do such signs? And there was a division among them. They said to the blind man again, what do you say about him because he opened your eyes? He said, he is a prophet. But the Jews did not believe concerning him, and he had been blind and received his sight, until they called the parents of him who had received his sight. And they asked him, saying, is this your son? What do you say about who you say was born blind? How then does he now see? His parents answered them and said, we know that this is our son, and that he was born blind. But by what means he now sees, we do not know. Or who opened his eyes, we do not know. He is of age. Ask him. He will speak for himself. But verse 22 explained the reason why the parents gave that answer. His parents said this because they feared the Jews, for the Jews had agreed already that if anyone confessed that he was Christ, he would be put out of the synagogue. Therefore his parents said, he is of age. Ask him. So they again called the man who was blind and said to him, give God the glory. We know that this man is a sinner. He answered and said, whether he is a sinner or not, I do not know. That was very fair answer that he was given. One thing I know, that I was blind and now I see. Then they said to him, what did he do to you? How did he open your eyes? He answered them, I told you already and you did not listen. Why do you want to hear it again? Do you also want to become his disciples? Now this man who has been born blind, who was sitting and begging, now he was being bold in testifying about his relationship, the activity that was very short between Jesus and him. Verse 28, then they reviled him and said, you are his disciple, we are Moses' disciples. We know that God spoke to Moses. As for this fellow, we do not know where he is from. The man answered and said to him, to them, "Why, this is a marvelous thing that you do not know where he is from." They knew where Jesus was from, so they were not stating the truth. Yet he has opened my eyes. Now we know that God does not hear sinners, and that is a lot of truth. If there is an impenitent sinner, defiant sinner, rebellious sinner that is praying to God, even attempting to have God answer their prayers, the Bible will not hear such person. But if anyone is a worshiper of God and does his will and live his life in harmony with the Ten Commandments, because whoever, for the one that refuses to hear to the law and prays, even his prayer, this is an abomination. But if we want to live the life of harmony with God's will, we will be in harmony with his holy law, including the fourth commandment, which is the 7-day Sabbath. And then he goes on to say, if anyone is a worshiper of God and does his will, he hears him. Since the world began, it has been unheard that anyone opened the eyes of one who was born blind. If these men were not from God, he could do nothing. They answered and said to him, "You were completely born in sins. And are you teaching us?" And they cast him out. That phrase, cast him out, it means he was defellowshipped. He was removed from the congregation that these men belonged to. Jesus then heard that they had cast him out, and that was unfair that the congregations of this religious leader have cast these men out. And I want to, those who are also watching this program online, perhaps you used to attend the church and for some reason you consider was unfair, you were cast out. You were removed from the church. And you long to go back. You long to want to have a fellowship with God. And I want to say that when this type of situation happens, when unfairness takes place, Jesus can also reach out to you, just like he reached out to these men. And also for us here in this congregation, we need to be always in tune with the Spirit of the Lord to be sure that we do the right thing and we are able to stretch the hand and even admit perhaps when we might have not done things based on all the light at that particular point in time. Jesus reached out to this man who has been cast out, who have been defellowshipped. And when he had found him, he said to him, "Do you believe in the Son of God?" He answered and said, "Who is he, Lord, that I may believe in him?" And Jesus said to him, "You have both seen him, and it is he who is talking with you." Then he said, "Lord." The word Lord actually there is referring to the recognition that he is God. "Lord, I believe." And he worshiped him. The Greek language there is very descriptive. Reminds me the passage, and I close with this text. Turn with me to the book of Exodus chapter 34. And that will be the last verse before we have our food washing this morning. Exodus chapter 34. And the Bible tells us in that when God manifests his presence to Moses, the Bible says in verse 5 of chapter 34, the book of Exodus, "Now the Lord descended in the cloud and stood with him there and proclaimed the name of the Lord. And the Lord passed before him and proclaimed the Lord." Notice that is capitalized. That's Yahweh, Jehovah, Jehovah, God, merciful and gracious, long-suffering and abounding in goodness and truth, keeping mercy for thousands, forgiving iniquity and transgression and sin. And by this communion service, we are going to also experience that. And by no means clearing the guilty, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children and the children's children to the third and fourth generation. So Moses made haste and bowed his head toward the earth and worship and worship. And so when this blind man is talking to Jesus, and then Jesus says to him, the one that is talking to you, that is he. Then he comes. And the Greek said that he prostrated himself before Jesus and worshiped him. Jesus did not refuse that worship. There were times when the disciples were worshipped and they refused to be worshipped because they knew that only God must be worshipped. There were times when angels appeared to humans, like John in the book of Revelation, and twice he bowed before this angel to worship the angel. And the angel said, no, do not worship me, worship God. But this time, Jesus is the one that is being worshipped, and he rightfully accepted that worship because he is the Son of the living God. He won. Jesus won one. So, in conclusion of my message throughout this series, we find that Jesus sought one, the Samaritan woman. Jesus taught one, Nicodemus. Jesus won one, the man who has been born blind. And all of them became followers of Jesus Christ. Just by one-on-one basis. And that's the best way to bring people to Christ. And so, my brothers and sisters, we are going to now invite our pianist to play some music while we go in different direction. There are going to be three. I asked today to our deaconess, deaconess, and we're going to have three rooms. One room will be, all the rooms will be at the same level where we are. Just go behind the pianist and to the hall, and then turn to the left, and then you're going to see a room for the ladies, another room for the gentlemen, and there will be one for couple. The one for the couples will be behind this wall toward the corner, and that's where you're going to find the one for couples. So at this point, we are going to have food washing, and for those who are visiting and they are not members of this church, you're welcome to observe, you're welcome to participate, and we